When Gender Sways Justice, the Brenda Andrew Case and Supreme Court Ruling. In the shadow of gray prison walls in Oklahoma sat Brenda Andrew, the only woman on the state's death row, convicted for the murder of her husband in 2004. Yet, her story isn't just about the crime she was accused of or the punishment she faced. Brenda's case tells a much larger tale, one that exposes the ugly underbelly of how societal biases infiltrate courtrooms and corrupt the justice system. This isn't just about one woman. It's about understanding how gender can sway justice, turning trials into morality plays and defendants into caricatures. Today, we delve into the Supreme Court's extraordinary decision to overturn Brenda Andrews' conviction, explaining how a trial steeped in gendered prejudice violated her due process rights and why this landmark ruling demands our attention. In 2001, Brenda Andrews' name was splashed across headlines when her husband, Rob Andrew, was shot in what prosecutors claimed was a calculated murder fueled by greed and betrayal. The case was complicated by her suspected accomplice, a former lover. For many, this was a tale of forbidden passion turned fatal. But once Brenda's trial began in 2004, the courtroom shifted from examining evidence to dissecting her character. The prosecution painted Brenda not just as a murderer, but as a woman unfit for societal roles. She wore provocative clothing, witnesses said. She had multiple affairs, they whispered. The language used to describe her during the trial was not just damning, it was demeaning. Prosecutors labeled her a hoochie and a slut puppy, descriptions that had no bearing on the crime, but plenty of weight in skewing jurors' perceptions. During testimonies, her fitness as a mother was attacked. They urged the jury to ask themselves, would a good mother dress like this? Behave like this? But here's the problem. None of this had anything to do with whether Brenda was guilty of murder. These were distractions meant to exploit cultural biases about how women should behave. These arguments planted seeds of prejudice in the minds of jurors, overshadowing the actual evidence about the events leading to Rob Andrews' death. What makes Brenda Andrews' trial stand out isn't just how gender influenced the arguments, it's how these arguments suppressed logic and fueled judgment based on stereotypes. The phrase "good mother" became a yardstick for her morality, as if her worth as a human, and her innocence, could be measured by whether she adhered to societal expectations. Women defendants, particularly those in cases involving violence, often face this toxic dynamic. Society has long imposed rigid expectations on women. They should be nurturers, caregivers, selfless, and moral. Brenda's failure to fit this mold was weaponized to portray her not just as a morally questionable individual, but as someone culpable of murder because of her perceived lack of virtue. Does being provocative or unconventional make someone guilty of a crime? For Brenda, it seemed to. Jurors weren't asked to imagine her as a person with complexities. They were urged to see her through a singular and prejudiced lens, a distorted image crafted by a society that too often reduces women to the roles they play within it. After years of appeals, Brenda Andrews' case finally reached the U.S. Supreme Court, where her lawyers raised a crucial argument. They contended that the prejudicial, gendered evidence introduced during her trial had violated her constitutional right to due process. The court agreed. The landmark decision confirmed what advocates for justice had long argued. Brenda's trial was not focused on whether she committed murder, but on whether she conformed to societal norms of being a good woman. The Supreme Court ruled that such evidence was irrelevant to the crime, and more importantly, deeply prejudicial. It recognized that introducing gendered character evidence in cases like Brenda's unfairly influences jurors, drowning out the facts of the crime with noise tied to societal biases. This decision isn't just about Brenda Andrew. It's about safeguarding due process in a legal system meant to uphold fairness. The ruling sends an unmistakable message. Gendered evidence has no place in criminal trials. Personal character and societal expectations should never eclipse the pursuit of objective truth. Let's pause and reflect for a moment. Brenda Andrews' story may seem unique because of its sensationalized nature, but the truth is, it exposes a widespread issue: gender bias within the justice system. What happened to Brenda could, and does, happen to countless women. In courts around the world, women face the additional burden of defending their morality, not just their actions. A man on trial is rarely, if ever, scrutinized for being a bad father based on his wardrobe or past relationships. A woman, however, is held to impossibly high societal standards, as though guilt or innocence hinges on how closely she adheres to arbitrary expectations of femininity. This bias in Brenda's case didn't just affect her, it shaped the jury, the verdict, and ultimately the course of her life. Her conviction wasn't based solely on evidence, it was fueled by a storyline that reduced her to labels, portraying her personal choices as evidence of her capacity for murder. The outcome? Brenda landed on death row, a punishment disproportionately influenced by prejudice rather than hard proof. For true crime audiences, the passionate community of curious minds dissecting cases, studying evidence, and questioning motives, Brenda's story offers a profound opportunity to reflect. True crime isn't just entertainment, it's a lens through which we examine society's flaws and failures. How often do we see defendants, especially women, vilified in ways that reinforce misogyny? How often do scandalous details about personal lives overshadow the concrete facts of a case? Brenda Andrews' case reminds us that behind the headlines, there is often a deeper narrative of systemic inequity. As fans of true crime, we have a responsibility to ask hard questions. Are we consuming stories critically? Are we acknowledging where bias may have played a role in shaping outcomes? And most importantly, how do we hold criminal justice systems accountable to ensure fairness for everyone, regardless of gender, race, or class? The Supreme Court's ruling in Brenda Andrews' case shines a spotlight on a critical issue. Gender bias in the legal system is not an isolated problem. It's systemic. The intersection of gender and justice reveals patterns of prejudice that disproportionately disadvantage women, especially those who defy societal expectations. Studies have shown that women who are assertive, sexually liberal, or independent are more likely to face harsh judgments in courtrooms. When these societal biases seep into jury deliberations, they create an uneven playing field where women must not only prove their innocence, but also their worthiness as human beings. This isn't about excusing crimes. It's about ensuring that trials remain fair and that the focus remains on evidence, not character assassinations rooted in stereotypes. Brenda Andrews' case isn't a fluke, it's a warning. Brenda Andrews' overturned conviction is a step forward, but it's far from the end of the road. The bigger question now lies with us. How can we as a society ensure that justice is free from prejudice? How do we dismantle these biases in a legal system upheld by humans, as fallible as they are influenced by societal norms? Legal reforms are crucial. Criteria for admitting evidence must be stricter. Judges and jurors must be trained to recognize and reject arguments steeped in gender bias. But just as important is the shift in public consciousness. The justice system reflects the society it serves. If we, as individuals, continue to feed into stereotypes and accept biased narratives, the courtroom will mirror those prejudices. Holding the justice system accountable isn't just about passing laws, it's about changing how we think and how we treat women, particularly in moments of vulnerability and scrutiny. Brenda Andrews' case is not just about her. It's about defying a system that favored prejudice over fairness, stereotypes over substance. It's about shining a light on how gender bias can invade the sanctity of justice and violate the rights of those standing trial. For true crime fans, Brenda's story calls for a deeper reflection. Can we commit to examining cases critically and resisting the easy pull of sensationalized narratives? Are we willing to challenge the justice system when it strays from its principles of fairness? Brenda's case is a chilling reminder that justice isn't always blind, but it's also an inspiring example of how persistent efforts to expose systemic failures can lead to change. As fans of justice, truth, and unraveling stories, let us learn from her case and demand a better system, one that judges individuals on facts, not the clothes they wear or the roles society expects them to fulfill. Because justice, in its truest sense, should never have room for prejudice.